Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the Pentagon added over 130 Chinese companies to its blacklist, labeling them as in the favor of the Chinese military while operating inside the U.S. What it means for the U.S.-China competition. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says she doesn't see Trump's recent warnings about the Panama Canal and Greenland as a sign of military coercion, but rather a warning to China. Hands off the strategic assets to the United States. And a lawmaker pushes a bill as debate over the Panama Canal heats up. The move would give the president-elect power to regain control there amid activity from China. Over 100 Chinese companies operating in the U.S. are helping advance the Chinese military. That's according to the Pentagon. It released the updated list of these companies Tuesday. The move is being seen as a further curb on Beijing's access to advanced U.S. know-how. In the race for superior defense capability, cutting-edge technology is key. The Pentagon lists a total of 134 entities, 57 Chinese firms the department believes are aiding China's military while operating inside the U.S., as well as 77 subsidiaries tied to them. This list is designed to counter a tricky strategy the Chinese Communist Party has been using to skirt restrictions and other sanctions. The Pentagon calls it China's military-civil fusion strategy. Beijing has vowed to build a world-class military by 2049. The Defense Department has warned that this military-civil fusion strategy is an aggressive tool for Beijing to achieve that goal through exploiting foreign resources that are disguised as civil business dealings. The Pentagon updates the list every year, and the latest version almost doubled the number of the listed companies from the year before. And Apple's biggest rival in China, Huawei, the battery maker for electric vehicle maker CATL, video game giant Tencent, and a state-owned shipping line Costco all made the list. The DoD's findings say these companies have contributed to the development of the Chinese military, despite their businesses appearing to have little to do with the defense industry. Being on the list doesn't mean instant punishment, but it will discourage American companies from working with them. In some cases, it could lead the Treasury Department to impose sanctions on these entities. Some of the companies are already feeling the heat. Tencent's shares listed in Hong Kong dropped by nearly 11% when the market closed on Wednesday. CATL's shares in Shenzhen also dipped by over 4% as of Thursday. Incoming President Donald Trump is facing mixed responses from the world after he refused to rule out using military strategies to take control of the Panama Canal and Greenland. Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni said she sees Trump's message as a warning to China. The comment follows the Italian leader's recent visit to Trump's Florida home. She spoke in Rome Thursday.
I rule out the possibility that the U.S. in the next few years will try to forcibly annex territories that interest them. I think Trump's statements are more of a message to some big players, some other major global players, rather than hostile demands against those countries.
Meloni also echoed Trump's concerns over China's increasing presence around the Panama Canal and in the Arctic region, where most of Greenland is located.
The Panama Canal was built in the early 20th century by the United States. It is essential for the global market. It is essential, obviously, for the United States, for the connection between the two coasts, etc. Greenland is a particularly strategic territory close to the North Pole, rich in strategic raw materials. These are both territories in which, in recent years, we have witnessed a growing Chinese protagonism.
Trump emphasized that seizing control of the two locations is critical to U.S. national security, especially with Communist China looming over the two choke points. The Panama Canal connects the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. The U.S. is the Panama Canal's biggest customer, with numerous Navy fleets and commercial ships passing through it every day. China follows the U.S. with the next highest number of transits through the shipping lane. The canal allows ships to cut through Central America and sail between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in about 8 hours on average, saving ships days of sailing time. The shortcut is a significant part of both global trade and defense routes. As for Greenland, the world's largest island, is rich in minerals and oil resources. It sits on the shortest route connecting North America and Europe and is governed by Denmark. If the U.S. government were to take control of the land, it could boost the U.S. military presence in the Arctic region and help counter threats posed by Chinese and Russian militaries. A congressman is taking President-elect Trump's wish to regain control of the Panama Canal to the next level. Rep. Dusty Johnson introduced a bill to let the president negotiate the return of the Panama Canal to the United States.
Johnson says China's activity around the canal is a cause for concern. Former President Jimmy Carter handed sovereignty of the U.S.-built canal to Panama in an agreement that took effect in 1999. But the United States retains some rights. One is to take military action to secure the canal from foreign aggression, or if the canal is used to interfere with U.S. interests. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries brushed off Trump's efforts. Jeffries remarked that House Democrats don't believe they are sent to Washington to invade Greenland, rename the Gulf of Mexico, or seize the Panama Canal by force.
Former President Jimmy Carter honored in Washington's National Cathedral after dying at 100 years old. All living presidents attended the service, including President-elect Trump. Looking back on Carter's service, why did the 39th president say ending establishing formal relations with Communist China was his greatest achievement? And what came of that decision? Let's dive in.
It was 1979. Washington established diplomatic ties with Communist Beijing. For a president who got a deal done between Egypt and Israel and struck a nuclear accord with the Soviet Union, Carter believed ending hostility with Beijing was among his greatest achievements.
What are you most proud of?
I helped promote peace between other countries that were potentially at war. I reached out to long-term adversaries like China.
His decision came at a cost. The U.S. no longer officially recognizes Taiwan. U.S. troops pulled out. The island democracy of 24 million people now facing the growing threat of a possible Chinese attack.
From Taiwan's perspective, that meant that it officially became an unrecognized state, and that really is what put Taiwan in this very compromised position internationally.
The U.S. maintains unofficial ties with Taiwan, regularly selling weapons to its military. China experiencing huge economic growth, due in large part to its relationship with the U.S. Now, China is the world's second largest economy. But prosperity did not trigger political reform. Chinese leader Xi Jinping could potentially stay in power for life, with a military more powerful than ever. Bilateral relations dropping to the lowest level in years. Carter always maintained people-to-people ties will prevail.
Carter introduced human rights into U.S. foreign policy for many foreign countries, but not China. After leaving office, he didn't stop engaging with Beijing. The think tank and foundation he founded have been promoting U.S.-China exchanges for many years. Carter has visited China almost every year until he fell ill with cancer in 2015. Chinese state media called on incoming President Donald Trump to, quote, carry forward Carter's legacy as a friend of China. Chinese-owned TikTok will go before the Supreme Court Friday. The app is fighting for its survival. That's as a federal law is forcing it to part ways with its Chinese parent company in 10 days or be removed from U.S. app stores. Why do attorneys general from 22 states want to ban TikTok? And why does President-elect Trump want to save the app? A look at the debate surrounding the video platform. Here's more.
Driven by concerns that China could access data or spy on Americans with the app, Congress overwhelmingly passed the measure last year with bipartisan support, and Democratic President Joe Biden signed it into law. Former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has compared TikTok's legal pushback to a hardened criminal seeking a stay of execution. The Republican chairman and the top Democratic member of a congressional panel focused on China jointly urged the Supreme Court to uphold the measure to protect the American people from foreign threats. But Trump has said he has a warm spot for TikTok and has vowed to save a platform on which his campaign generated billions of views. For its part, TikTok and ByteDance portray the law as running afoul of the First Amendment. Republican attorneys general from 22 states filed a brief with the court disagreeing with TikTok's arguments. and asking the justices to uphold the statute. Allowing TikTok to operate in the United States without severing its ties to the Chinese Communist Party exposes Americans to the risk of the Chinese Communist Party accessing and exploiting their data. These state officials, led by Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen, wrote in their filing. Montana tried to ban TikTok at the state level, but was blocked by a federal court. Trump's support for TikTok is a reversal from 2020, when during his first term as president, he tried to block the app and force its sale to American companies. Trump has since said a TikTok ban would benefit Meta-owned platforms Facebook and Instagram, which he has criticized for suspending him after the attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters on January 6, 2021. In a filing, his lawyer John Sauer said Trump wanted the ability to resolve the issues through political means once he takes office.
Ukrainian President Zelensky is calling Western powers to send troops and help force Russia into peace. This as the U.S. defense chief announces another aid package for Ukraine worth about $500 million. The chief of NATO says the allies need to bring Ukraine into the best possible position before any peace talks. He added that China would be watching the deal. NTD's Ariane Postar brings us more.
We must not let up.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is at Ramstein Air Base in Germany on Thursday. He's hosting the US-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group, created to support Kyiv. Austin announced a new military aid package.
Valued at $500 million. It includes additional missiles for Ukrainian air defense, more ammunition, more air-to-ground munitions, and other equipment to support Ukraine's F-16s.
Also at Thursday's meeting in Germany.
Hey, no problem.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with NATO Chief Mark Rutte. Rutte says that if and when Ukraine begins talks to end the war, allies have to make sure Kyiv gets a good deal.
And if it is not a good deal, it will be watched by the Chinese, the North Koreans, Iran, obviously Russia.
President-elect Trump previously said he'll work out a deal to end the conflict once he gets into office. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
The Pentagon says China is building up its Navy and nuclear capabilities. What does this mean for U.S. security? NTD's Melina Weisskopf spoke to Matthew Henderson for insight. He's a former British diplomat and researcher at the Council on Geostrategy. Let's dive in.
Thank you, Matthew, for your time. I want to start with talking about the Pentagon. So their annual report to Congress on China's operation is alarming. The report states that China is building up its military and psychological weapons. I want to play a clip for you, Matthew, with Chuck DeVore. He's the Chief National Initiatives Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and get your thoughts. Listen to this.
They're massively building up their nuclear arsenal. We expect it to expand to at least 1,000 warheads by 2030, only 5 years from now, probably going to be even bigger than that. And then the third thing is the Navy. The Chinese Navy, not by tonnage, but by numbers, is now larger than the U.S. Navy. China has something like 250 times the shipbuilding capacity that America does, and it isn't easy to build ships.
How do China's growing nuclear capabilities change its military options, especially if there's a conflict over in Taiwan, for example?
Yes. Well, I mean, the premise has been since the word go that U.S. nuclear superiority was the winning card over Taiwan. In one of the early iterations of a Taiwan crisis, I understand that the Pentagon quite seriously was considering the use of a nuclear weapon on the Chinese mainland, and that news, I'm sure it reached Beijing, perhaps once acted as a deterrent. But it is long since those days have been relevant. But nonetheless, peace and security in the Western Pacific has been guaranteed by the US. The US protects its allies in Japan and in South Korea. And it has always been assumed, I think, that this was something that would be delivered under a nuclear umbrella of some kind. Now, if your nuclear umbrella is predicated on the idea that the Chinese have no first use as a policy, then it might work. But when it is quite clear that the step change from 200 to 300 a few years back, then to 400 5 or 6 years ago, and in the last year up to 600, having increased by 100 warheads, perhaps in a year, we're looking at a step change. This is no longer something that is restricted to a traditional no first use posture. And I would put them in that middle space now, when it looks as though they could quite easily move out of that and consider a number of different options. Now, it isn't only the number of warheads, it's the capacity to deliver them, and huge amounts of effort have been put into making them more flexible, more resilient, and more capable of dealing with different kinds of nuclear engagements, whether it's in theatre or over very long range. So the nuclear response is no longer monochrome. It's quite complex. And you can imagine the use of nuclear weapons in quite a different number of types of engagement. Now, when a power has that capacity, it makes it much more difficult to contain it.
Thank you so much, Matthew Henderson, for your time. We hope to have you back again soon as more developments.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, a large Chinese biotech firm announcing plans to sell a vaccine facility to a U.S. drug maker. This as a bill in Congress looks to ban Chinese biotech firms from getting federal contracts. 200 cyber attacks in 5 years. Japan accusing a Chinese hacking group of threatening the country's national security. And what makes Russia's growing dependence on China a cause for concern? Wilbur Ross, former Secretary of Commerce under Trump, explains.
Because the more that we force those three Axis powers to act jointly, that's not a good sign. That's really how World War II got started.
That's next after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A major Chinese biotech firm revealing plans to sell one of its facilities in Europe to a U.S. drug maker. This as a bill moving through Congress could soon restrict U.S. business dealings with Chinese biotech companies. China's Wuxi Biologics said Monday that U.S. drug maker Merck would purchase its Ireland-based vaccine facility, priced at roughly $500 million. The sale comes as the Biosecure Act moves through Congress. It passed the House back in September. The measure is designed to keep Americans' sensitive health and genetic information away from foreign adversaries and to encourage U.S. biotech companies to reduce their reliance on China. If passed, the bill would ban federal contracts with targeted foreign firms and their business partners. A House Select Committee spokesperson warned that biotech firms linked to Wuxi Biologics and the Chinese Communist Party pose a major national security risk. BTIG analyst Justin Zelen says that the upcoming Trump administration is ramping up its hawkish stance on China. Japan is accusing a Chinese hacking group of launching hundreds of cyber attacks and threatening Japan's national security.
The Chinese group called MirrorFace allegedly conducted more than 200 cyber attacks over the past 5 years. Japan's National Police Agency says the group's goal is to steal data on Japanese national security and advanced technology. The targets include Japanese government ministries, the country's space agency, and individuals such as politicians, journalists, and others. MirrorFace sent emails with attachments containing malware to the organizations and individuals. The emails typically used certain keywords in the subject line, such as Taiwan Strait, Russia-Ukraine war, and others.
How could Russia's military weakness and China's economic and demographic struggles affect the United States? Those are some of the topics covered by a new book, Risks and Returns. Joining us now to discuss it is author Wilbur Ross, former Secretary of Commerce under the first Trump administration.
Wilbur, now you mentioned in your book that Russia's nuclear arsenal may not be fully operable and called it a largely impotent country. Now, how does Russia's military weaknesses affect its global power and its relationships with allies like China, for example?
Well, I think we learned a lot about Russia, and a lot that at least surprised me, even though I had been on the National Security Council Principals Group for the 4 years of the first administration. What surprised me was how poor they were at strategy. Their whole strategy for invasion seemed to be just throw masses of people and masses of equipment in. And that obviously was fairly ineffective against the Ukrainians. But the other bigger surprise was how poorly maintained their equipment was. Their tanks were not well maintained. Their fighter planes, their bombers were not well maintained at all. And that raises the serious question, their nuclear warehouse, which is their big claim to power, is mostly from the 1970s. Now, if they haven't maintained that equipment very well since the 1970s, who knows if it's even operative at this point, because you can't leave complicated systems to their own for all those years. So I don't know the answer, but certainly Russia looked weaker than we had thought and is weaker now that they've had so many casualties. I mean, the very fact that they had to hire 13,000 soldiers from North Korea is a tremendous sign of weakness on their part, and a tremendous sign that they're running out of military age people that they can get to come and fight. So I think Russia is being unmasked quite a bit as a sort of paper tiger. And so that's good. What's not good is it's making them more dependent on China and on Iran for equipment, and nowadays making them somewhat dependent on North Korea. So that's worrisome, because the more that we force those three Axis powers to act jointly, that's not a good sign. That's really how World War II got started. So I don't like the parallel that we're forcing, or the events are forcing, those three entities to work more and more together. That's not good for us.
Wilbur Ross, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.